All right. Welcome to the channel. I'm here once again with Bill Sanders from the Watch Art Side channel, who was kind enough to oblige me. He's someone who knows a great deal about high horology and specifically about Daniel Roth, of which he owns a couple, if I'm not mistaken, and we can get to
I
that.
just sold one, and I'll tell you why, but that's that's for
Um,
later.
well, it might be the right time, and I think that's the one of the last questions I will like to ask you about what this might have in terms of consequences for the market, for the collector. But before we get to that, again, I like to welcome you back to the channel. Last time we were talking about your wonderful project, Lyrique, which started with Etude number one.
There's no
Um,
product placement here at all.
and which I know continues full steam. So hopefully
Yeah,
we will have a little bit of time to talk about that as well.
we're getting ready for the second round. So yeah, any
Very
questions
cool.
anybody has, I'll be glad to answer those.
So today we will talk about Daniel Roth, the man, and Daniel Roth, the brand, especially since LVMH just announced, Louis Vuitton just announced that they are reviving the brand under the auspices of La Fabrique du Temps. And I just want to start with the simple question, Bill.
Mhm.
What does the name Daniel Roth mean to you, and what is the significance of this man for modern independent watchmaking?
Boy, um, the funny thing, well, probably this is true with just about every independent watchmaker, but with Daniel Roth, I think it's a little more so. And essentially, shortly after watchmaking school, he was approached by the wasn't the Chaumet brothers, but the people the Chaumet brothers hired to reset Breguet. And there were a lot of applicants. They wanted someone to be sort of help revive Breguet. I think at the time they only had a couple sports watches left, and it was sinking fast. And so they asked him. They said, "Well, would you join us?" He said, "Yeah, I would, but I need to go back for another year in order to really get to the level that I need to be to do this." And that tells you a great deal, not only about Daniel Roth, but the people who hired him. They said, "Okay, this we will give you a year to go out and then come back." And when he came back, this is when he started making all of these. He made probably almost yeah. There's one the watches that he created for Breguet. I think Breguet would have applauded. He said, this is the kind of thing that, we used to do. I think he had a workshop on the bridge in Paris or something on the or the dock or something like that. But yeah, this is one of the reasons that, when you look at that and you look at his the more recently, he's been making tourbillons and moldable tourbillons. So it's very, very much of a guy who is just very much into horology.
Can
Um,
I
Go
say a
ahead.
couple of sentences about that? So when Chomet brothers wanted to revive Breguet, I think they hired whatever you would call it, managing director of or CEO François Baudet,
Right.
uh, who basically solicited applications. But what really impressed them about Daniel Roth, presumably, was his honesty, because he had already proven his mettle in Audemars Piguet, which at the time was as important as it was as a watchmaker, quite provincial, quite insular even. Apparently, Daniel Roth was the only watchmaker in their workshop who wasn't from Le Brassus itself. And his history is very interesting, even though he comes from Nice, France. He actually has a lineage of watchmakers in his family who are from La Chaux-de-Fonds and who actually opened a clock making repair shop in Nice. So he was absorbed in the craft since he was really little. And he
What?
basically said, hey, let me take a year and actually study the work of Breguet intensely and immersively. And apparently he built, by the end of this year, this perpetual calendar pocket watch, which almost looks like a subscription Breguet watch itself. Like you said, ALB would be rightly proud with him. And the rumor is that the Chomet brothers actually sold this watch, which ended up financing his year at watchmaking school.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. No, there's a I guess it's the difference between a mechanic and an artist. And there's I think any really great watchmaker has to have some kind of, I don't know what sort of a visceral connection between the doing a watch, like it's creating something more than something that will go on the assembly line and they can, they can make in larger numbers. Um, that's that's I guess the first thing about his, and then he did a number of them. So you mentioned Nice. Wasn't FP Journe originally from Marseille? And then he went and he worked with his uncle in Paris as a, well, in fact, he was a bad boy in Marseille, and they said, "We're going to send you up, and you're going to work with your uncle." And
I think so. That's right,
so
and
from
that's a very interesting history. And again, I'm not going to open my mouth because as much as I love the French people at large, I might have some prejudices against Parisians specifically. But I've always found the people from the south of France, especially, to have a different kind of energy. Let's put it this way. Even people from Alsace, Alsace-Lorraine, that famous region as well. It's just like any other country, I guess, Bill. As you know, in the U.S. too, someone from Texas and Tennessee might be different from someone from Connecticut, who might be different from Southern California. So that's an interesting Southern France connection that you established there, which is very fascinating to me.
I got some stories, but I can't tell you here. So, not, yeah. Anyway, those were some of the things, and I think that he had, today you hear this in terms of what I call their mission statements. Mission statements are, when they publish a mission statement, they often use the word passion. Like it's become more of like a, I don't know, it's just a word that I would rather not hear anymore, because about watchmaking, because I don't think the people that I think people say it because they say, well, if I say that, they'll buy more watches, rather than saying it because they do. And usually, if I think good passion in watchmaking is displayed in the watch, not in the saying. And so that's another thing. In general, it's sort of funny. Here's a guy who comes out of watchmaking school and then gets into it. He's got this wonderful passion. He's working with wonderful people who support that in Breguet, and then the Chomet brothers. I love these. It's almost clownish the way here these guys are a couple of the richest men in the world, and they decide to try to
ninth generation diamond dealers.
Yeah,
very established family.
And then these bozos decide to try to corner the diamond market, and it tanks on them. It's like, come on, you guys. the rest of us were part of a diamond, heritage. And what do? You blow it. So anyway, so that was when, I guess, let me see. He, I'm trying to think what happened to Breguet. I know what happened to Roth. I think,
I can fill you in on that.
yeah,
So this, again, we don't need to get into the Chomet
yeah,
debacle. We will just recognize their importance in reviving the kind of heritage brand that Breguet was, because after all, Daniel Roth talks about this in a couple of interviews. Honestly, the name Breguet as a proper name was familiar to people, but Breguet as a brand, when in these early 70s, Roth's involvement, if I'm not mistaken, is basically 1973 to 1987. In the early 70s, as an active watchmaker, they were practically non-existent. Like you said, they were making some Type 20s for the civilian market still. They were making some interesting dive watches, which is funny because you were talking about a sinking ship. Perhaps that would have helped them. But at the end of the day, everyone knew the tourbillon. So they needed to start something. Daniel Roth basically chose the tourbillon. And at that time, again, it wasn't something that was easily found in a wristwatch, right? A lot of the things he did with Breguet, I think we take for granted now because he has done it, right? A tourbillon wristwatch wasn't such a commonplace and wasn't such a rite of initiation for an independent watchmaker before Daniel Roth, Francois Baudet, and Chomet brothers revived it in Breguet. When they introduced the perpetual calendar, which is the watch on the right here, an automatic perpetual calendar in serial production in 1976, that's almost a whole decade before Patek introduced a self-winding perpetual calendar to their serial production. So there's a lot of very important watches that they brought to the market at this time. And it was, I think, 87 when Chomet brothers lost Breguet and they were taken over by this financial company, this investment group
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
from the Gulf, from
right.
Bahrain, called
Yeah,
Investcorp.
that's it. Yeah, I had forgotten that. But the sad thing about it was that when that happened, Breguet left. I mean not Breguet, but Daniel Roth left, and that was sort of like I'm not sure why. I think that the his sponsors were this was that the Singapore, um,
The Hourglass.
right, and they were supporting his own eponymous brand, the Daniel Roth brand. And he started making, to me, a lot of really very interesting watches. The one that I have, I had two. Uh, one I just sold because wasn't because it was a Daniel Roth. That's it on the left there. I just can't get into Breguet. I mean, not Breguet, but chronographs. I don't know what it is.
Mm.
Chronographs and I had one of the chronographs, and it was a wonderful chronograph. Really, I just not into chronographs. So, but that's another story. But there are a couple other ones of his that I would like to get, and you mentioned the Papillon.
Yes.
And I had read somewhere that the Papillon was the last one that he did when he was in that's the one with the Papillon. This was the last one he did that was all his, so to speak. In other words, this was something from uh, the um, the chronograph I had an El Primero chronograph movement in it, but the Papillon is soup to nuts. I think his movement too, unless I don't think he had another. I'm not sure what he had, if he had a different base in there or
So
not. Do you know?
the interesting thing with this watch is, going back to that timeline, Daniel Roth breaks from Breguet when Investcorp takes it over in 1987, establishes his own brand in 1988, and it's almost unimaginable at the time, right? This is not the era where anyone and everyone who is somehow disparaged by the meager salaries they have, unfortunately, as watchmakers, and the lack of mobility they have in these grand conglomerates, breaks off and launches a company. So he takes that challenge, and I think until almost 1995, he basically works on very minimal resources, very loans that he took from banks. Hourglass helps him in the meanwhile, the Singapore-based, but also Oceania and Southeast Asia, East Asia-based dealer, helps him. But I think after 1995, he kind of starts, reducing his involvement, getting disparaged a little bit by the corporatization, commercialization of the brand. And this is basically, in a way, his return after that sort of hiatus, because it's introduced in 1999, sort of to mark the first decade of the brand. And he designs it, like you said, it's his piece. And this is before he completely breaks off, after Bulgari takes on the brand
That was
name in 2000. And he goes on, of course, to make watches right now, kind of with the insularity that today defines Roger Smith, and before him defined George Daniels. Now he is back in Le Sentier and makes these jelly bean shaped watches under the name Jean Daniel Nicolas.
Yeah. No, that to me it was the from what I understand, and this there was a guy that I was communicating with who knows him personally and was recently, and he went to see him about something, and Daniel Roth sort of had also he's a good friend of Philippe Dufour. It was sort of something that was off, and that he had been very upset with what happened with Bugari. Just it was like, what did you bring in somebody like me for? If you and they've got it's sort of like having somebody telling you what to do that didn't know anywhere near as much as you did, and or like this is our style, or I this or I that. Now there is again, I'm talking about some of the ones that I like, and that's going back to Papillon. And I found out that there's a Bulgari Papillon, and I wonder to what extent I I have to think that that was all his, and but he was only there for a year, but had a really a big impact. He and Gerald Genta were there, I think, at the same time, and you can see a lot of the Gerald Genta in Bulgari in their Octo line.
Can I say something about that connection? Because
Yeah,
you mentioned two proper names that I dearly respect and that are really important to Daniel Roth's own journey in horology, and that's the name of Philippe Dufour and Gérard Genta. So again, extremely underrated watch. This is the so-called reference C117. It is an instantaneous perpetual calendar that Daniel Roth designed in collaboration with Philippe Dufour at the time. And they actually used a movement base. This is 1991, 1992, from Lemania. And that was something Roth took from Genta, because Gérard Genta at the same time was basically one of the only independent watchmakers, and he was very famous for his complicated watches. So since Daniel Roth was familiar with that movement that Gérard Genta used for his perpetual calendar, he borrowed the same base, and they worked with Dufour, and Roth worked together to make an instantaneous perpetual calendar at the time, which again, we nowadays we almost expect everything to click forward at midnight.
I
Um,
yeah.
at that time,
There's
it was a great feat.
there. Let me ask you something. This is Are you familiar with? Trying to think what her name is. She's sort of the editor of Quill and Pad.
Yes, Elizabeth Dürr.
That's it. That's who I was
She just
thinking of.
retired, I think, from her position for personal reasons, but she is one of the greats for sure in
She
horological journalism.
she had said, and she said about Gerald Genta, she said that he was a designer, uh, not he never not a watchmaker, and he never made his own movement. And recently, somebody was was saying, "Oh, wait a minute, there's some little group of watches that somehow he had worked on, had done some things with under his own name." uh, the arena with the retrograde and so on and so forth, that he may have. I know he did have a degree in watchmaking, and a background in watchmaking, but it was often hard to figure out what Gerald Dinta did and what he didn't do. He often took credit for things that he didn't do, like
That's true.
uh, the overseas design. He didn't have anything to do with that, but they would say, "Oh, you did the Royal Oak, and then the Nautilus, and
The
the
tutu,
overseas."
the 222 is sometimes given to him, even though it's Jörg Haschek who did it.
He
Uh,
never corrected him though.
the thing is, the funny thing is that he is such a larger than life figure that
Yeah,
that is what allowed him. And imagine, again, Daniel Roth has his own brand, Gerald Janta has his own brand. Daniel Roth is at the time just a watchmaker. Again, we are not in this post-pandemic era where everyone is going crazy after independent watchmakers. Gerald Janta is a superstar. Like you said, he has a training in as a jewelry maker. I'm sure he has some familiarity with watchmaking, but not to the extent where he could probably design an entire movement architecture and work on those watches himself. Like you said, and like Mrs. Dürr explained, he is very much a celebrity and designer rather
yeah.
than a watchmaker. But that was the power that allowed him to put his own name on the brands, and his perpetual calendars at the time, which had this lapis lazuli background for the moon phase, were extremely popular, and he designed some of them for Cartier as well.
Oh
I will
yeah.
pull up a picture so we have sort of an idea of it.
Well, I mean, almost all, not all, but almost all of Audemars Piguet are Royal Oak, and he designed a Royal Oak, and that had wide things. You're right, though. One of the things um, that I like going back to Daniel Roth, I like the what's it called, the Epio Cervex case that he had.
Ellipsocurvex, the double ellipse.
That's it. The double. I like that, and my Metropolitan has that, and I just had that watch on yesterday. I'll tell you something. This is something that it's the only watch I have that does that, and this is especially true tonight. Right? We jump ahead on daylight saving times. Is that correct?
You tell me. I don't know.
It is. I believe it's tonight, and then so we'll be on daylight saving tomorrow. On the watch that he did, there's a little button, and one has S and the other one has W. And when it's daylight saving time, you there's a little pin pusher. You push it, and it jumps ahead an hour. And then on the in the winter, when it's back to standard time, you push the little pin pusher next to the W, and it jumps back an hour. And so you have a to me that's a neat piece of watchmaking in there. That's because that's what it is. And and it's in this the double double helix and double
Ellipse,
whatever they are.
double ellipse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I kind of made fun of his new case shape, because obviously, having had to let go of the brand and of the name, he had to let go of that trademark shape too, and now it's like a jelly bean, which doesn't help. I don't even know what that is called. But this particular case shape, the reason I like it is it's not exactly rectangular, it's not a square either, it's not perfectly round, it's anything and everything in between, but it does somehow preserve some of the interesting aesthetic elements and visual cues that he reinvented for the modern wristwatch era in Breguet. So these are the two pieces that have the hand of Daniel Roth and that have the vision of Daniel Roth. On the right, we have the Breguet 3237. And along with 3037, these hand-wound chronographs were some of the first watches that Roth did for Breguet. And you can see from the straight lugs, kind of extended from the case, to the blued steel hands, to the techniques of hand guilloche for decorating the dial, the method that we call Breguet frosting for the hour tracks. There are actually a lot of similarities with that traditional shape that he established and the signatures that he has perfected in Breguet that he brought into the C147, which is an early generation of the chronograph. This one actually has the Lemania CH27 or 2320 base. So this is a hand-wound version. After the hourglass ownership, they have transitioned, like you said, Bill, to the Zenith El Primero caliber 400 base, which is, of course, self-winding and has a date indicator right between 4 and 5 there. But it's also, we have highlighted Janta as a watch designer, and that's important. And we said Daniel Roth is a watchmaker, but he certainly has had an aesthetic vision himself too, which makes his watches, especially the ones that still carry the Daniel Roth brand, very distinct, very noticeable, almost immediately recognizable on the wrist. So
You know,
that's an important part of the brand.
something that's really funny. The other day I was looking at some, I think it was Christie's auctions or one of those, or Phillips, or one of the auctions. And I was trying to find out, a lot of times you can get details in an auction house description of a watch that you don't get on like Chrono 24 or eBay or any place else where they're selling, but they have them there. So I was looking for some of these, and I came across some Daniel Roth watches, and this is before the pandemic. My God, the difference in the prices. People during the pandemic, I think they must have stayed home and read up on on Roth or something, because suddenly the prices just jumped like mad. And I wish, of course, we all wish we had bought lots more of everything back then, and it was just a few years ago. But this was one, I think, his, and also Roger Dubuis.
Mm.
There was so many, just like they're giving them away almost. And then, but now, and to me, that's a good thing. Because I think a lot of watchmakers that sort of had a very narrow vision of what was a good collectible watch has expanded.
Mm.
They're bad for people like me who are looking for a good deal on one, because I think there's adios with that.
Well, I think that's something that we can tie into our day as well. But I do want to highlight the important work that a collected man did in particular at that time,
Yeah.
and that's really the future on social media and on the market of secondary watches and these sorts of semi-obscure brands as they are getting an ascendance. when you have an outlet that combines good writing, a lifestyle approach, and an actual inventory of those watches. And by good writing, I don't just mean good stylistics, but in the sense that a collected man puts in the work into interviewing people, into going into archives, into really scouring every source and resource they have to establish kind of unauthorized history of the brands that they want to put on the map, and the brands they want to sell, of course, and they make no hiding of that, right? They are trying to establish their own market, but the kind of work they produced on the early history of Daniel Roth's independent watchmaking career, especially between 1989 to 1995, was, I think, really important. And it brought a public consciousness about the brand, about the name. People suddenly thought of Daniel Roth not only as someone who proved himself in Audemars Piguet and Breguet and then more or less went obsolete, but as someone who has provided the groundwork for today's renewal and revival of independent watchmaking. Someone who didn't only make a tourbillon, but someone who had a chronograph, who had these beautiful retrograde hour hand watches, who collaborated on the instantaneous perpetual calendar with Philippe Dufort, who had a minute repeater, and who kind of, as his swan song with the brand, made this beautiful jump hour piece under the name Papillon, since it kind of has the visual of a butterfly on the dial of the watch. So now that's my next question to you, Bill. What do you think it means for Louis Vuitton to now revive the name of the brand, and without involvement, it seems, by the man himself? There's no Daniel Roth anymore. He does his own watches, but there's going to be a Daniel Roth brand again, presumably making C187s in some shape or form, the tourbillon watch that he first made.
It's sort of an irony here, I think, going on, because LVMH also owns Bulgari, and I think someone, and he really felt, I mean, there was some damage done there, I think, to him in his head there, and just was not treated well at all, and was not a good experience. And it only lasted a year, which is something about that. Then this is coming out, well, since Louis Vuitton owns both of them, and I think that he can probably get Roth to say something about them, as long as he's sort of like one rung above Bulgari as far as the LVMH Louis Vuitton is concerned.
Yeah.
And so I think, I don't know, there are a lot of mysteries that are happening now with this, and they have to do with some kind of revival that we don't know all the details on. For example, with Urban Jurgensen, I'm very interested to see what in the world is going to happen with that. And by the way, too, you mentioned a Collected Man. Great source. What a wonderful source. I got the book that they had on Derek Pratt, and the Collected Man had some wonderful examples of what Derek Pratt did, and and it was one of his early watches that was from Urban Jurgensen by him. That was where we got the ideas for the observatory hands on the Larique watch. This was from we stole it from Derek Pratt rather than from Urban Jurgensen. Anyway, actually, we stole it from Collected Man, who stole it from him. Anyway, going back to this.
It's all interconnected after all, because Derek Pratt was very integral to the Urban Jurgensen revival, of course, himself. But I think, again, you can go back immediately, but we have talked about the trajectory of the Daniel Roth brand. So we can actually take examples and take lessons from three distinct eras of Daniel Roth, when he was very much the main man between 88 and 95, where he had a decreasing involvement and engagement with the hourglass takeover from 95 to 99, 2000. And when he basically completely disengaged himself after 2000 with the Bulgari takeover. And, of course, people rightly highlight that early era when he was directly involved from 89 to 95. But in terms of the aesthetic cues, in terms of the spirit of bringing classical watchmaking with a sense of style and a little bit of quirk and flourish, aesthetic flourish, I think he has that brand, that banner was carried quite well between 95 to 99. And then with the Bulgari takeover, it mostly disappeared, right? They just started taking a few models by Janta and taking a few models by Daniel Roth, and then just releasing them to sell without really continuing with the spirit of innovation, without maintaining an entire catalog, and without really involving these big names in the operation. So going back to it, what do you think is happening today under the LVMH umbrella with Daniel Roth?
I got a feeling they're going to invite him to sort of be there in the same way that Roger Dubuis was shortly before he died. He was invited back to the Roger Dubuis brand, which had nothing to do with him really until they decided they wanted to show that they had this really special watchmaker. I wouldn't be surprised, because I think Daniel Roth would love to sort of like to be with the owner of Breguet. I mean, not Breguet, but Bulgari, but they couldn't tell him what to do anymore. One of the things on here, one of the most interesting things, and I don't know whether this was originally Daniel Roth or not, but something I like a lot is that three-armed second hand,
Yeah.
where you have the to me that is just fascinating, with the three different tracks on there for the second hand, and to, such an ingenious use of something, and the movement is like any other second hand. It was the hand itself, the hand with arms, which I think is another sort of like and so there's more than just one delight in the watch. I mean, it's just not, oh, I got a tourbillon. It's here's a tourbillon that is lots of other things too.
And by the way, so it's of course a 1 minute tourbillon, which means that the regulating mechanism, the oscillating mechanism, combines its revolution in exactly 1 minute. And like Bill said, it's set with these three hands of varying length, and that was a Roth intervention, which show the seconds on three different scales that fan upward in this. Like you said, there's more than one aesthetic delight on the watch. And actually, unfortunately, and I do apologize, I don't have a photo of the backside of this watch. And I feel bad because I appreciate backsides a lot more than the front sometimes. Wink, wink. But it also has on the back the power reserve indicator and a pointer date, which has the same sort of aesthetic appearance as this particular face. So this is a watch that is beautiful front and back, and it does that without even having to exhibit much of the mechanism beyond the tourbillon. It's really quite impressive.
You know, one thing I would really, really like to see LVMH do is, other than this, because this watch will go for what, over 50, $60,000, something like that would be my guess, maybe over 100,000. That's what all of Daniel Roth watches cost now, and they're all tourbillon. But I would like to see them come out with some of his other watches, like the this I forgot the name of that. It's a real simple name. With their let's see, which one is it? I'm thinking of some of the ones that have the retrograde and some of the others, even the simple ones. I would like to see that. You know, something for so the lumpen proletariat of us who are, for what we could sort of afford. Um, the problem is that there's so much really watchmaker work that goes into any one of these. The time and the effort that goes into it. Also, too, you see some of these hands. The anchor hand that they use for the
Mhm.
second hand. I've seen that there's some brands now that I've seen that have been using that heavily now, and other kinds of things you see that he crops up with. There's a brand that's called, God, I want to say Xerox or something like that. It's a very inexpensive one, but they've also done the thing with the multiple tracks for minutes and hours, and so you can see the influence beyond just what he did
Hmm.
as a watchmaker and some of the ideas that he came up with.
This
Yeah,
is
that's a nice one. Is that one
yeah.
yours?
No, I wish. This is I made a new friend in New York, specifically double wristing. He wears this watch pretty often. This is a product of that hourglass era between 95 to 99. It's a watch that's called Le Sentier, after the
That's it.
location of the workshop.
That's it.
And they have these in various metals, usually on leather straps. But what is really unique about these versions is they have an integrated bracelet that doubles down, triples down, quadruples down on that double ellipsis design. And it actually has it all over the integrated bracelet as well, which is so obnoxious, so over the top that you just got to love it. And it makes for an interesting sports watch with a very strong statement, sports chic, let's say, in the sense of a Nautilus or a Royal Oak more than, say, a Submariner.
No, his watches, they have that something special. There's um, FP Journe has that some. Even if they were cheap, FP Journe has something special. So does uh, trying to think, Caribou and Lannon, and they have something about their watches, Gerbil and Forsey, and they're they're uniquely interesting in some ways as watches. Roger Dubuis does too. I got this one sympathy of his, and
Mhm.
it looked like it just had a bunch of lines all over the place, and it turned out that they were all Roman numerals, and they were cut by sectors, and so you have this little V at the bottom that had been cut by a sector, and it looked like two lines going into the sector. And so there are things like that that make it so much more fun than just an alarm clock on your wrist or something.
That's a funny thing. This is, for example, his early two-hander time-only dress watch that he did with Daniel Roth brand. It's a model they call C107. It is a hand-wound movement. Sorry, it's a self-winding movement based on the Frédéric Piguet caliber 71. And again, it's simple, but it's beautiful. It has a lot of the aesthetic elements that distinguish his watches, but distilled into this uh, beautiful simplicity. And the funny thing is, when he talks about his years in those interviews in Breguet, he talks about how they made all these minute repeaters, perpetual calendars, of course, tourbillon, all of these chronographs. But he says one thing that I really enjoyed was the simplicity and beauty of the extra thin dress watches that I made with Breguet. So, like you said, this goes back to one of your first remarks on Daniel Roth. The passion really makes a difference, even at the level of entry level watches, even at the price point of entry level watches. And I do hope LVMH integrates some of that, because otherwise we will have to scoop up anything and everything they have left in stainless steel from that 1995 to 2000 era with the hourglass, because there's some great work there and still some great deals left. One thing that I want to ask you now, because this is maybe, again, I don't want to take too much of your time. If it were up to me, I would keep you hostage here for 3-4 hours, but I know your time is more valuable than mine.
I think you're talking about my bedtime.
Frying pan time is coming.
It's not that early.
But I want to ask this because I was just looking through the Hong Kong-based online-only auction of Philips, and they already have 2 Daniel Roth watches on there. I want to show you them. So you can already see kind of the creep up in the market of an upsurge of interest in the brand again. And I feel like it can push up the prices quite significantly in the same way that pandemic rush has caused. Sorry, this was the online Geneva-based auction that already opened. That's right here. So they have one of an open worked perpetual calendar.
Oh, that's a nice one.
You see those engravings on the display?
Wow. Yeah, it's you know, they have in the, let me see what they have on that. Their estimates. So many of these have gone way over the estimates. You know, there's like FP Journe just went nuts, and boom, they were, off crazy now. And this is what's happening with these. It's a funny thing you brought this up, because I was going to this one, my Daniel Roth chronograph that I wanted to sell. I should say my chronograph I wanted to sell. I wanted to keep the Daniel Roth of it, but I was going to put it on an auction. I thought, because of this very reason, they've really been going up quite a bit. But a friend said, "Oh, he really wanted it," so it didn't go on the auction. But that happened to a couple of my watches. I just mentioned it, and I said, "I'm going to do this with it." No, let me have it. Oh, anyway, yeah, no, that's a beauty, But when these things, when they get up there, they're over the mid 20,000s, and they're on their way north to 100,000. They're just they might as well. Ooh, hey, there's one. Which one's that?
That is,
yeah, that's a little chronograph, isn't it?
Yeah, this is a monopusher chronograph. In fact, it's very special.
Yeah, that is.
And the rarity is, I think, even intensified by the fact that it has the Clou de Paris, the hobnail decoration on the dial, than the usual pinstripe, or the more common pinstripe, I should say.
Clou de Paris. I tell you something, Eli, your French is so good and mine is so bad that every now and then I know one or two.
Hey, if you are looking for an assistant to pronounce these names for the Watch Art Side channel, the link of which I will share now in the
I
chat.
was thinking of somebody named Fifi LaRue, but that's okay.
look, I mean, you don't have to, Bill, you don't have to show my face. I can just stay in the background. I know I'm not much to look at, but
Yeah,
I
but
can just sound out the names from
but
the back.
the French maid uniform I had all set up, it just wouldn't go over with it. Oh, gee, I'm gonna get in trouble if my wife sees this.
I'll not say anything. Please
Okay.
subscribe to Watch Artside channel. I'm sending the link. I know I never have this many viewers, so I know most of you are already coming from there, but I do appreciate you. And if anyone of my audience is seeing Bill Sanders for the first time, if you want to see what I aspire to in my presentations, if you want to see the level of knowledge and hospitality and engagement and enthusiasm that I can only replicate on my level, that's Bill Sanders. Please do subscribe to his channel.
Well, I tell you, you have enthusiasm and can pronounce French, which I think is worth a lot. So, anyway, I think the Young Brando channel is a good one. It's a great one, as a matter of fact. So,
Washington
anyhow,
football fan asks us, Bill, and I do want to address this question: is there a hand-wound model that's not a tourbillon? Absolutely. The whole chronograph range from the earlier period is based on the Lemania CH27 or 2320 base, that original base of the Moonwatch caliber, Omega 321. So that would be the simple chronograph from that time, which in terms of its pricing is no longer that simple, is C147. I will write it in the chat as well, C147. And then there is a C167, that two-hander press watch that I was showing, comes also with an option of a hand-wound caliber rather than the self-winding, which is the earlier model. The perpetual calendars, actually, Washington, that are made by the Daniel Roth brand from that time, are self-winding calibers. So they're either based on the Lemania 8800 caliber, or later on with a Girard-Perregaux base, apparently. But the one that's for sale in the Geneva online auction for Philips is actually a Lemania 8800 base. This is this one, lot 35, C117. This is the Lemania base.
even has a beautiful rotor.
Amazing. I mean, look at that guilloche. I think most watch dials that presume, or advertise themselves as guilloche, but are really stamped dials, would only aspire to this level of beauty on the face of it, and this has it on the rotor, which is quite delicious. Bill, I know you don't have too much time.
Yeah,
but
okay.
I do want to ask
go
you.
ahead. We'll have a little more time.
Okay.
You're right, though. I don't have a whole lot more time. There's a rolling pin in the background. Yeah, go ahead.
After the frying pan is packed, that's what comes out. I see.
Yeah, then the rolling pin comes out. No, go ahead.
We talked about the Lyrique Etude number 1 the last time you were here, and I'm gonna put that up on the that interview up in the chat as well. But I want you to talk a little bit about what's going on that front. What does the Lyrique group have planned? What's in the pipeline? Anything further that's coming from the number 1?
You couldn't have picked a better time to ask me, because we're we're having some. We're going to be having an announcement pretty soon, perhaps as soon as this next week. The last time we did this, I got all of these people said, "Well, I didn't know about it. I didn't know about it." And so this time I'm going to have a little video explaining what our new project is.
Mhm.
And one of the things we did on our initial project, we spent a lot on the design and development because we ended up with a bespoke movement by Agenor. So we're the AGH 6801. That's our movement. And so we decided what we are going to do. We had such a yeah, there it is, a great movement and the case. We got the Voutilanen and Kalen case, so we thought we'd reuse that, and we're going to do a engine turn Giloche on the next one, and
Mhm.
it's going to be with a totally different dial, but the essential watch we have. You can see it's also something that is. It's got a nice narrow case. I didn't realize how narrow it was until I put on some of my other watches. This is a nice, thin, very wearable watch. The other thing about it that was surprised a lot of us was how the way it winds. I know you don't talk about that a lot, but the winding of a watch. I have some watches that are very hard to wind either because they have little bitty winding gear or they have a great big winding gear. You have either one of those, and you either have a hard wind or the forever wind. Ours is the Goldilocks wine,
It's
just right.
it looks great, and really I think those details that even someone like you notices down the line when you actually have the watch on your wrist is really a testament to the fact, like you said, you started working from inside out,
Yeah.
right, from the caliber to the larger concept of the watch. And more importantly, even when you were making that transition, you had an actual designer on board, an actual horological designer in the name of Mathieu Allegret. Um,
He was that was the best thing. We didn't. I tell you, we didn't know anything going into it. And we had a lot of guys who had these fabulous collections, but we thought we knew everything. We didn't know jack. And fortunately, we were, I guess, had enough sense to realize that we didn't know everything. And so what we would do, we would say, well, who would you suggest for this, and who would you suggest for that? For example, we didn't know that we thought, well, if they made the dial, they'd make the hands. Well, we found out that wasn't the case in this particular dial maker. And so we found out about this fantastic hand maker, Fiedler, and they made these observatory hands that are clearly not off the shelf. So anyway, like you said, we had this great designer and everything else. I don't want to go on ad nauseum, but I I like this watch so much that it's fun to wear and fun to have, and we're starting up again. And like I said, I'll have an announcement next week or so. So it's a perfect time to ask about
Amazing.
this.
And I do appreciate also, both for, I know that there are some collectors who bought multiples and some are trying to perhaps sell them, but I also know a lot of people learned about the project quite later in its conception and in its phase of development. And I'm sure you will have already a ready-made group of interest for the second project. And I think, again, from my humble standpoint, I appreciate the fact that you are keeping the case, you are keeping the movement, which is something very unique and already very distinctive about the watch. You don't always have to reinvent the wheel. You already have such a great base that I think
Yeah.
number two deserves to be perhaps a version of this watch that has a little bit more flair, like you said, it's already quite beautiful, but maybe a hand guilloche dial with, who knows? I know you are probably wedded to those beautiful observatory hands, but maybe a different color or styling of the hands.
Oh
I
yeah,
don't know.
no,
Just throwing things out there.
you're right. It's going to look like a very different watch. We do rely though on what we do is the whole way we went about things was by consensus. We decided that it was sort of democratic.
Democratic.
The reason it wasn't totally democratic, we didn't want to have a watch where 51% of the group loved it and 49% hated it. That wasn't what we were looking for. And so what we would do, we'd usually get to a place and it's sort of like, we'll ask Matthew. And that was how we did a lot in terms of design. And we also trusted the guys at Boot Lennon and Caton. They were just great. I mean, we would ask them something, and they would say, "Well, this is this, and that's that." It took them. That was a really expensive case that we made, and they had to get some new tooling and everything else. And again, we learned about all of these things that had to be done. It was a lot of the pandemic was still going on, and so they couldn't get people because they were testing positive for COVID. It was, I tell you, I am so happy it's done. And I'm glad I'm wearing it. And then I ran out and got a Jean Rousseau strap for it, because if we put
Could we get a closer look on the wrist or in the
sure,
hand?
there it is. That's the strap. I got a shiny gator strap for it. And then we have the teardrop lugs, and it just, it's a very and it's not it's not a fat watch. I like that. But the problem is that I got some other watches. There's a point where you like one watch so much you don't care about all of the others, and boy, do I hear it from them if they don't get worn. So that's the way it goes.
That's great. It's so fantastic to hear about it. And I posted the link to our earlier conversation. Bill Sanders talks about there also about future plans with perhaps different styles, different complications. So you can hear about that. But I'm happy that they will have an announcement even sooner
Yeah.
to talk about the future of the Etude that
No,
has the same spirit,
we'll
but maybe a different
yeah.
flair, different kind of styling a little bit.
We'll be having signups for the next one. We'll go through the elite group, and then to people on a waiting list. And if there's any left over, then anybody else who wants to join.
Fantastic. So we have just passed the hour mark. Thank you so much, Bill, for being here. Thank you so much for letting your audience know that you would be here. This was a great show for me, and I'm so grateful for your knowledge and your generosity in sharing it. It was a pleasure to talk about Daniel Roth with you.
I
And
tell you, you really informed me a lot about a lot of the details you had on Daniel Roth, and I appreciate that too. It wasn't
hey,
a one-way trip, believe me. So I really appreciate what you've done on that.
thank you. I do appreciate it. But again, I feel like I could be your student for the next decade and would still have something to learn. So I appreciate you. And I'm so glad that we had at least that 10-15 minutes at the end where we could talk about Lyrique as well. And once the announcement goes out, I would love to have you back to perhaps talk in more detail if we can steal you again. You don't have to promise now. I don't want to
No,
corner you or push you, but I would love to have you back about that.
thank you. Great. We will see you next time. Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Please hit the like button on the way out. I appreciate you. I will see you later tonight with another live stream. Thank you,
Okay.
Bill. Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone.